Welcome back. It's time for our favorite segment on a Sunday morning. South Africa is almost 30 years into democracy, and the African National Congress has governed throughout. There has been some success, but also some failures. Veteran political analyst Ebrahim Harvey's latest offering delves into how the failures to resolve the race and class divide essentially resulted in some of ANC's biggest failures. The great pretenders, race and class under the ANC rule could also prove to be a sobering prediction of the country's future if issues are not resolved. Harvey joins us now to unpack the book further for us, and thank you very much for your time, Mr. Harvey. Now,
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
The first thing you read in the book is the fact that you wrote the book because of what happened in Marikana. And you wrote the book, you explained further that it had to do with the student uprising, the latest ones. We know we call it 1976, but we've had latest ones in the 2000s as well. And other failures, even including Life Esidimeni.
Yes. No, you know, I very consciously structured the book as I did, dealing initially with history, theory, and then the last 3 chapters was devoted to the key issues and moments of crisis over the past decade in South Africa. And so Marikana features, I mean, it was the first time ever, you know, that the police opened up fire on killing so many miners and injuring so many. It was really a watershed moment in both the parties, a very sobering moment about, to me, what ANC rule has turned out to be. And then the student uprisings, you know, and there's been so many things. They said many health crises and so on. And altogether sketching quite, I think, an ugly picture of what has happened under ANC rule in post-apartheid South Africa. But I must say, because of the really atrociously poor understanding of race and racism in this country, especially on social media, I had to go back and dig into the origins of race and then come down to South Africa and deal with the current issues, you know, that's unfolding. So I'm hoping that this book, you know, has a sobering effect, if I might put it that way, on the ANC in particular. Because, you know, I go back to its birth, you know, in 1912 to systematically actually illustrate how the ANC has evolved and developed to the point that we could have, under an ANC black majority government, these kind of things happening in post-apartheid South Africa, that I think the most pessimistic forecasts of ANC rule during the apartheid times could not have envisaged the depth of the decay and degeneration and the shocking corruption. And I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. So, you know, the purpose in writing this book was to hopefully have a big review and shake-up, you know, of the ANC in office.
Now, you were obviously not very kind to the ANC in what you say has happened, and I think everybody is quite shocked at what it has become and how the country is also looking like something that people didn't expect when they voted for the ANC in 1994.
Yes, no. You see, there's many ways in which I could respond to your question and what you're suggesting, but I think indeed, you know, I've in many ways, I discussed this in the book. I don't think I mean, you know, since 1652, you're talking about oppression and exploitation. 1994 was the first time ever that black people were allowed to vote. So it was a very huge and defining historical moment in South Africa. And indeed, you know, I mean, black people at least expected that their basic needs and interests would be met. And just look at the unstoppable township protests, the explosion since June 2004 in the Free State, it started. It's never stopped. I mean, you know, I'm reminded now about what Mandela said. Mandela said, and it seems like the masses had heard him, and that all those who took to the streets and revolted had remembered his poignant words. He said that if the ANC does to the African people what the Nationalist Party did, then he said they would be justified in doing to the ANC what they did to the Nationalist Party.
Exactly.
You know, I think that beautifully sums up what has happened, in this country. And the ANC has to take account for it. It's in power. It's the ruling party. Who else do you talk to? And unfortunately, it seems that ANC is going into a deeper and deeper crisis with a terrible factionalism that has gripped it, over the past few years. And it seems it's going to probably even get worse if you see what's happening around Ismagashule and the conflicts that's raging now. My guess, really, and it's unfortunate that I think it's possible that it might get even worse.
Imagine, I think a lot of people are thinking the same thing. But also the ANC comes as a tripartite alliance. It comes with, for instance, Cosatu, of which you were a staunch member of at some point. But that, or rather you were a unionist in Cosatu. But that Cosatu has become a shell also of what it used to be, if we tell the truth. And you mention it in your book. You mention it from the time Zwelinzima Vavi left Cosatu. I think it's become worse.
No, man, honestly, I have a lot of sympathy and sentiment for Cosatu because I was there for a while, When Cyril, the president, was there, we were together. It's a sad shadow of its past, man. It's shocking, you see how its performance and what it has done also in Nedlac, more and more tying up with the ANC. But at the same time, there are huge problems now with the public sector pay dispute,
Exactly.
But, I call for the end of this alliance, believe me, from 1999 in columns and articles. And indeed, what I predicted would happen to this ANC alliance has happened very explosively. But it had got much worse when NUMSA, how on earth can you expel 350,000 members of a trade union? It's bizarre. It's never happened, And then also Vavi himself expelled. So, the Cosatu has, but believe me, this is under a lot of pressure from the ANC. You'll see that these problems occur when the president of the ANC had got onto the NEC. He was elected, and since that moment, you'll see how these problems grow worse and deepen in Cosatu, And, it's come full circle, I don't know how much longer the Cosatu is still going to remain in alliance with the ANC. I really think that the time has come for... Vavi is now, with the new federation that he's involved with, linked up with the Socialist Workers' Revolutionary Party. And I'm hoping that it could make a formidable impact in the local government elections. I think we really need a new big player, on the political stage, especially one that's rooted in the black working class majority. Because really the suffering that has happened has really been in the ranks of the black working class. And those are the people fighting in the townships for basic services and so on.
Let's look at, Mr. Harvey, the public sector wage negotiations that have basically collapsed. You look at things such as the PPE scandal, many others, and you get public sector employees being told that they will get the same salary while food prices are going up. You get people who are in the healthcare system, who are in the front line, didn't take leave for over a year. Besides those ones, there are those who lost their mothers and fathers who are in the public health sector. And today they're being told they're not getting a cent more. But you're looking at people who are taking these decisions, who are in the public sector themselves, but are still enriching themselves and giving themselves, for instance, more VIP protection. While you're telling those who are on the ground working for a minimum wage that they will get nothing.
It's absolutely scandalous. It's probably the most scandalous story of the public sector in post-apartheid South Africa. And those are the workers who are on the front line with this combating COVID. Many of them have died, You'd think that faced with this crisis, that the ANC state would be kinder to public sector workers and all kinds of public. It's not just nurses, it's also teachers and other. And then you look at it at the same time that they're doing this. And those were statutory wages that were agreed to 3 years. Those were bargaining. That is why I believe, in fact, it's unlawful to have, refused to implement the third year of that agreement, But when you look at that alongside what has happened to the SOEs, which is itself part of the broader state public sector. Just look at the corruption, look at the bailing out, look how much money it has taken from the fiscus that should have gone to the townships to address the needs and interests of the black working class majority. And it's when you look at these strands together that I think it becomes more really so unfortunate what the ANC is doing in the public sector. It's just horrendous, really. And I fear that, you know, you must remember COVID is still around.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's going to have a very negative impact on public sector workers in the months and years ahead. If there were workers who really deserve so much more, it is public sector workers, man. And then look at the cabinet. Look at their bloated salaries and look what they've earned. At the same time, I mean, did you see them take a big knock in their earnings? You know, and they rather let the black working class majority shoulder the impact of the crisis instead of taking responsibility. I mean, these are people who voted for the ANC from 1994. Since the birth of the ANC, it's been primarily rooted in the black townships of this country. And look at how the ANC has treated black working class majority since 1994. It's shocking.
And I think you also have a mention in your book where you say that the main thing the ANC knew before it even came into power and promised is service delivery protests in the townships. That's where things, they knew all along that that is where things will start erupting and exploding. And since 2004 in the Free State, people, I don't know if you saw, my colleague Kailihle Khumalo is in a few Johannesburg suburbs where they haven't had water for 6 days.
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, you know, during the darkest days of apartheid, when we were facing the might of the racist onslaught, I mean, the townships were, you know, it's really incredible. It's incredible to look at what the townships were like. We know it, what happened under apartheid, with all the horrors there, and compare it to what's happening today. If you walk, I mean, sewers running down the roads, children dying in pit latrines, schools not having water, sanitation. I mean, you know, I often said if the ANC's renewal that it has talked about so glibly and emptily since 1997 Stellenbosch Conference, if it could have focused on basic services and turned the situation around in the townships, it might do much better at the polls, you know, but I can tell you, I think in the light of what's happened in the public sector and the townships, I think the ANC is in for a bigger hiding at this forthcoming local government elections. It appears inevitable, you know.
And you look at, you know, an important chapter for me in the book was chapter 5.
Yes.
I found it very important to read that chapter, and you called it Mandela Negotiations and Rise to Power of the ANC.
Yes.
But throughout the book, you also mentioned where you mention a lot that there were mistakes even during negotiations.
Yeah, obviously, I think the biggest mistake, which is a thread that runs throughout the book precisely because it's so big, and it is captured in the title, Race and Class. So what the negotiations did in the 1990s is very simple. They dealt with apartheid. The political features of people didn't have a vote, etc., decided where you lived, and so they changed all that. But what they didn't change, they left it intact. That's why I say this notion of white monopoly capital that I often talk, it's not a deceiving, misleading myth. It's a fatal reality till today. You can study this Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The whites dominate the economy, management, everything. The BE made a dent, but in the interest of the black elite, not the black working class majority. Exactly. That's why BE is not actually for the black working class. BE is there for the black elite and the perhaps black middle class, not for the working class at all. It was never meant for that. As I indicated the other night on ENCA, Anglo-American, that's where the origin of BE lies, not at the ANC. But, you know, it's so unfortunate, really, what has happened, you know. And whether we're going to have a different future in the months and years ahead, really, I doubt very much. No doubt the COVID impact has complicated things for the ANC. It has made things worse. The fiscal constraints are greater, and partly because of the impact of its neoliberal policies, you know. where fiscal constraints have been of the highest priority, instead of addressing the infrastructural needs in the communities, water, sanitation. I'm a scholar of water and sanitation, both my master's and PhD. People don't know sanitation is actually worse than water. Sanitation is in a worse state in South Africa than it has ever been. And in fact, both water and sanitation, and you can't talk of the one without the other.
Yes.
And all this happening under ANC rule. They could not even take care of the water and sanitation needs of people.
And then you look at a former president who is at war with the Constitutional Court.
Oh, but I mean, he's been at war for how long? And Zuma has fought tooth and nail to prevent himself getting into court. And why do you think? When I interviewed him, Becky, and I asked him, would you do the same thing again when, after the Squire's judgment, he fired Zuma? He said, Ebrahim, if I had to live my life over again, I would fire him again. So can you imagine what has happened to Zuma post that, after the Squire's judgment, Nkandla scandal, and so much more? Zuma is afraid. That is why he's fighting like hell not to get into court, because once you get him into court, honestly, I think the evidence is overwhelming. And,
I also just want to talk about just your opinion in terms of what we do now, because the SACP, right, which is part of the tripartite alliance, has sort of been replaced by the EFF. The EFF has been the mouthpiece for, land redistribution, which is something that you also mentioned in the book that is going wrong. The negotiations there also were just a little bit offside. You look at, the fact that you're saying that it's up to the electorate to decide, possibly in October. But who do we vote for? It looks like our leader, we don't have many options.
Well, you're absolutely right. That's the problem. That's the very big problem in South Africa, that as much as the ANC is in this mortal crisis at the moment, they probably will win the local government elections, I think, on the whole. What will happen in Tshwane, in Joburg, I think is the big question again. But that is precisely why I think Irvin Jim, NUMSA, and the Socialists are trying to build a mass-based alternative. Because really, we're not just in a huge political crisis, we're in a huge capitalist crisis. This is the biggest crisis in global capitalism probably ever. So you can't be wanting this and that demand without addressing whether the system can afford, And this is the problem, really. I don't foresee any future in South Africa unless the ANC not only gets to grips with these problems in the townships, but does something fundamentally, it changes with the ownership of the economy. These people completely dominate the economy. Their structures and their wealth has been left intact. And you can't excuse and leave that aside in an appraisal of the crisis in South Africa, I, in fact, think though the ANC rules the state, politically it's in office or power, but if you talk of economic power, really, and it's what determines the fate of countries, largely, it's still in the hands of the old white elite. That the ANC made its peace with. And out of it, it ensured that the interests of the black elite and more numerous black working middle class was served, and at the expense of the people in the townships. And that is precisely why they can't stop these protests and revolts since 2004 June, as I indicated.
Mr. Harvey, I could speak to you for an hour. The segment is only 15 minutes long, and I'm being told that I've gone above. But I just want to ask you one more question, if you could. We've spoken about the ANC, South Africa, and the bleak future that we're facing. Is there anything positive that we could say, or that you could say today the ANC has been able to achieve?
Honestly, I want to be very frank with you. I don't want to be harsh to towards the ANC. But I think both politically, if you look at the national question, which was to unite the colored, Indian, African, and white people. I mean, it's in a shambles, you know. Race is more rife. People speak about an explosion of race and racism. I don't know, I'm hard-pressed, to be honest with you, if you ask me about what the ANC has done. And you see, and whatever it may have done that's positive in the earlier period has been overshadowed so blatantly by the extent of the corruption and the incompetence, and the two go together. They always have gone together in the ANC. I'm sorry, you know, I have to I need more time to think about that, but it's difficult, you know. I think we're just overwhelmed by the negativities of the moment.
Too many. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and for coming to ENCA.
Thanks.
The Great Pretenders, Race and Class Under ANC Rule. I would recommend it to every single person who still votes for the ANC, every single person who works within the ANC. This is a real account of what has happened throughout the years, and it really gives advice on some of the things that could be fixed and some of the things that went wrong on negotiation level. Thank you for watching The Bookshelf. More news after the break.